Alright, so this is vodcast for Module 3, talking about fair use and copyright, applications of copyright laws and whatnot to education. And the first thing I want to point out here is from the article on enforcement and control of piracy, copying, and sharing in the movie industry. It was interesting to obviously see kind of even in 2007 some of the things that they were facing and how it is somewhat different today, but there are also many similarities. And the main thing that I thought was interesting was the four types of illegal distribution that the movie distributors were trying to deal with. The hard goods piracy, in other words, like actual copying of DVDs, CDs, that sort of thing, and selling them, kind of the cliche, going downtown to New York City and having some guy on the street corner selling you DVDs with the names spelled wrong and whatnot. Kind of those things you hear about, but that's one type. Then consumer theft of pay TV signals. I remember when I was little, people talking about the cable boxes and being able to access premium channels or whatever by opening them up and changing a setting. And well, we don't have cable boxes that are quite that basic anymore. Still, things I could think of similar to sharing a Netflix password with somebody else so they don't have to pay and can use your account, or could think of the same thing with like a Hulu Plus account or the Amazon TV, stealing TV signals, or even live streaming on websites around the world where you can see live TV and things that you would typically have to pay for. And then copying and sharing videos in pay TV, again, kind of recording it off of the TV. And then probably the biggest one that is still true today and growing is the internet file sharing. Sites like LimeWire that have gotten taken down, or other file sharing sites, while good in theory, then being applied to copyrighted things that obviously shouldn't be shared. There were a number of strategies that they've been using to try to counter these illegal activities. Obviously lobbying for stricter legislation. Let's create clearer rules, more restrictive rules, because you can't prosecute people for things that aren't specified in the law. Stiffer policies, stiffer punishments for breaking those laws then, or existing laws, increasing the amount of fines, or even including jail time or something like that for breaking copyright laws. Another thing of rewarding informants, both indirectly and directly through monetary reward, or the one article was talking about how how certain rental stores could report other rental stores whose prices were really, really low, and the only way they could have been charging that little was because they were somehow obtaining the movies they were renting out illegally. I know I've heard commercials on the radio and whatnot for reporting your company if they are pirating software and not keeping up with licenses, and they're offering rewards for people who will report their company. So that's one other way that they're trying to deal with this. And then preventing or discouraging the copying through technological means, either blockers or things that would degrade copies, although more and more with digital, that's harder to do. DVDs and Blu-ray discs have things in in them to prevent you from directly copying them. But for example, a screencast like I'm doing right now, if I turned on a movie, I could take a screencast of the whole movie and copy it that way. And so that is a very, very difficult one for them to prevent. The question I thought was interesting in the YouTube videos, especially that was brought to mind, was, why is this illegal anyways? Why should we care about people copying things? And the one mentioned in Canada that they just assume people are going to copy things, so they add a surcharge to buying blank media. Obviously, that might have worked to some degree when people were using physical media like DVDs and CDs to share things. But now with digital sharing, there is no medium that's being used, so that wouldn't work necessarily today. But I really appreciated the what Keith Newman, one of the professors at Ohio University, said, that a creative mind, a creative individual, should be compensated for their work, and that the work that they have has value. And just because we have an easy method of sharing that work, duplicating it, and then distributing it, doesn't mean that that is a valid thing to be doing. I really appreciate his point, because it places a value on the time of the person who created that. One of the opposing arguments to this is that, well, it doesn't really affect the music industry. They have so much money anyways, it's not really taking away from their profits. And I know that that is one of the criteria that the government uses in fair use and other things. But and they also believe that, those major labels and music industry labels should embrace file sharing and see it more like a free advertising kind of thing. I believe that while this might be the case to some degree in music, using it as free advertising, music and videos are very different. You may listen to a song over and over and over again. You listen to the radio and you'll hear the same 15 songs every day, over and over and over again. Movies are different, okay? So that strategy of looking at it as free advertising may apply in, for example, the case of the Ohio University, where they're sharing music. But when it comes to movies, that's not the case. You may watch a movie that you really, really like a few times, but, you're more likely with music to hear it once, then go want to buy the rest of the album, and so that you can have it to listen to all the time, than you are to watch a movie that's been pirated and decide, you know what, I like that movie so much I'm going to buy it so I can keep it forever. Once you've seen it, a lot of times we don't bother watching a movie a second time. Another issue, and why is it illegal, I believe that, as people, specifically educators, we ought to hold ourselves kind of to a higher standard. Their main concern, and it seems like the law's main concern, is whether the person who produced it is losing significant revenue. But I think the greater issue is the personal integrity of the person using it, paying a person his due. And then also what Keith Newman said about rewarding creativity. I believe that when we as a society stop rewarding creativity, we start to lose creativity, because there's no motivation other than just personal pride, and that's only going to last so long. Feeling good about yourself doesn't pay the bills. So if there's no tangible reward for that kind of creativity, it's going to discourage people from being creative. So I got to thinking a little bit about some of the issues involved, and I got searching a little bit more about the particulars of fair use and copyright, and I came across an interesting website, and I want to show it to you here through Education World magazine. This is in their, I wanted to be careful that I was using this fairly. So just showing the website here, educationworld.com, and they had this 5-part series. This wasn't part of a pay portion of their website or anything like that, so you can access it at the URL above to read the entire thing. But they had a 5-part series on an educator's guide to copyright and fair use, and they had 5 different sections. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of the things that I had taken specifically from this second and third section as I read that. So looking at this portion of the Education World website, the article is Fair Use, a License to Steal. I saw this quote here from copyright attorney Nancy Willard. It says, "The fair use doctrine established in a long line of court cases provides a limited basis by which people can use a copyrighted work without getting permission from the creator. The essence of the fair use doctrine is that a person is not using the work in such a manner that is, or has the potential of, diverting income from the creator." That's partly why I showed you the website here in this screencast. Part of that potential income would be the advertisements, and that's why I direct you to go to the site and look at the rest of it, see everything they have to offer there in those series of articles. Now, specific guidelines have been developed by librarians, educators, publishers, and this article cites those and giving specifics. I'm not going to get into all the specifics, but they talk about how much of a written work can be used, specifics related to using music, both like copying sheet music or audio music, also the use of videos and how much and whatnot. I won't get into all the details, but those are all in the article. But I did want to point out they mention that there are 4 key factors to consider. The purpose and character of the use. In other words, it's more likely for what you're doing to be considered fair use if you're altering the original work significantly. You're adding to it. Also, you're using it for nonprofit or educational purposes. Another factor is the nature of the copyrighted work, particularly things that are published rather than unpublished, things that are out of print. You can't get them very easily from a source that you could buy it from. And also factual as opposed to creative work. Things that just give data or give facts about science or whatever would be different than someone's artwork or their creative demonstration of facts about science or their particular graphic or whatnot that they came up with to illustrate factual work. So that's another thing to consider. Thirdly, the amount and substantiality of the portion used in relation to the copyrighted work as a whole. This is where those specific guidelines can come in handy, but the smaller the percentage of the whole work that you use, and especially if you're using a portion of the whole work that's not the most significant aspect of that work. Maybe you're using one of the subpoints or kind of a side topic that's also mentioned in a larger work that can help ensure that it can be considered fair use. And then fourthly, we mentioned this already, but the effect of the use upon the potential market for or value of the copyrighted work. In other words, are you just repackaging it and trying to sell it, figuratively speaking, to the same audience? Or are you kind of taking something and repurposing it? Or are you directing it to a new audience that probably wouldn't have, accessed that initially, but now you're making it accessible to a new audience who may then take it and actually contribute to the market. Also, the way you're using it, are you associating something with a cause or something like that that could negatively reflect on it and draw away from their market? One of the points that they made is the easiest way to avoid violating fair use is to use things in public domain. These are things that either the publishers have specifically put in public domain, certain things that are really, really old and not under a copyright anymore. The standards for that are laid out in detail in the articles, or things that are developed by the government data, government graphs and charts and things like that. Because we're citizens, the government exists to serve the citizenry. The things that they produce are part of the public domain, so we can use them freely without worrying about copyright. We should still cite those sources, but we don't have to worry about running into issues of fair use. And the other thing that we can do to avoid the issue entirely is to create our own resources. As we're creating our own resources, we need to make sure that we do not steal another person's idea for the construct or something like that, but creating our own resources is a very simple way, although possibly time and labor intensive way of avoiding this issue as well. Finally, there are a couple of quotes from the portion of this series of articles on copyright law and new technology. Some quotes that I appreciated here. The internet is not in the public domain. Just because a copyrighted work is already posted on the web doesn't mean it's there legally. You know, a lot of times we may be tempted to cite something from a source or take something. Hey, I found this resource and the website I got it on had it available for anyone to download. Well, were they the creator of that resource? And if not, they're not allowed to give you permission to download it. You would have to get permission and use it. You would have to get permission from the original creator. Also, recognizing that print rights and electronic rights are not the same thing. You may have permission to duplicate something digitally, but you don't have permission to print it out and distribute it. Or vice versa. You may have copies of something that are legal physical copies, but that doesn't give you the right to, scan them all and then distribute them digitally. So those are not the same thing. And then the general rule of thumb that I thought was a good safety net here is just when in doubt, contact the creator of the resource and ask permission. And the worst thing that can happen at that point is they say no and you have to find a different resource.